Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa baraka wa sallama tasliman kathiran ila yawmiddin amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah, after spending a few days in this blessed place, we'll inshallah appreciate it more inshallah. And I'm going to continue to discuss how people have venerated and respected this place over the centuries. Inshallah, we're going to start from the Sahaba. Last time in our last session we discussed the prophets and how they came here. And I wanted to mention that, when we were on Mount Zaytun, on the mountain of olives, and we looked down at the entire area from the beginning, from this place to the entire other end, and we should have imagined 124,000 prophets all here. Approximately 124,000. Imagine an awesome sight with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the front and all of the prophets. So now today we speak about Sahaba and then a number of pious individuals following him, following the Sahaba. One of the things that make this place so important, aside from the fact that Rasulullah ﷺ spoke about it, is the fact that Mi'raj. Mi'raj is an ascension. Mi'raj is when the ascension, when the Prophet ﷺ went up to the heavens. That's from Mecca to here and then up. That's what makes this place a very important place. For a lot of people, they think that if they come here, inshallah, they'll get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Prophet ﷺ also came through here. So because this was a stop on the ascension route, it makes it even more important in that sense. Of course, Prophet ﷺ probably came here because of the significance of this place from before. This place was significant before Rasulullah ﷺ came here. His coming here and the Prophet's coming here only makes it more important. Lots of Sufis and others have been just dazzled at this place, coming here and trying to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the other day, mashallah, we managed to get to the place on top of the Golden Gate, where Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi was supposed to have spent 8 to 10 years writing his book, the Ihya Ulumuddin. It's up there. I went up there and made some dua that Allah give us that tawfiq as well to do some work. Yaqut al-Hamawi in his Mu'jam al-Buldan, he considers this place to be the closest. He mentions that one of the reasons for this place being so significant, that it's the closest place between the heavens and the earth. Among the Sahaba, the foremost of the Sahaba who visited here, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu didn't come here, but Umar radiallahu anhu did, and that's well documented. This is the second Khalif, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, because he's the one who was invited by his name was Sophronius. Sophronius was the patriarch of Jerusalem at the time. After the Muslims had besieged this city, because it was under the Romans. After he'd besieged the city for a number of weeks and months, they eventually said, okay, if we're going to hand anything over, we want to hand it to your Khalif, to your leader. So Umar radiallahu anhu came especially for that journey, and that was Sophronius, the patriarch of Jerusalem. And Umar radiallahu anhu at that time gave rights to the churches, and that's why generally under Muslim rule, what you have is you leave the people of their religion, generally the Christians and Jews, you leave them as they are. You leave them as they are in terms of their churches and so on. The biggest example is in Jerusalem, where Umar radiallahu anhu refused to pray in the church itself, but prayed outside. Number two, after Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. Although he came before, and he died in 18 Hijri, while Umar radiallahu anhu died in 23 Hijri. But Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah was the commander of the armies for this area, and he died while he was on his way here to visit it the second time, and he wanted to pray in the Aqsa, and he is buried to the west of the river Jordan. Yesterday we saw that river Jordan where Yusha bin Nun came through, so he is buried somewhere there. Then number three, we have Bilal ibn Rabah. Bilal radiallahu anhu. Bilal radiallahu anhu, the Prophet's muazzin, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he visited Jerusalem, and they say that the first time he made his adhan after his adhans in Medina Munawwara, after the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam passed away, he left for Sham. He was in Syria, that's where he's buried, in Damascus, and he refused to give adhan again. There is this weak hadith which says that one day he saw the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam in his dream, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Ma hadha al-jafa ya Bilal? Why are you so estranged from us? Why don't you come to Medina Munawwara?" He couldn't bear it. He just couldn't bear the fact that the Prophet ﷺ wasn't there, so he just left. But then when he saw the Prophet ﷺ in his dream, as soon as he saw him in his dream, he just set off for Medina Munawwara. But he just went right to Medina Munawwara, and they say that when he got there, everybody's telling him to do adhan, but he's refusing. Eventually they told Hassan and Hussein radiallahu anhu to go and request him to do adhan. He couldn't refuse them. So then when he started giving adhan in Medina Munawwara, the women came out into the streets. They thought Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is back, because they used to connect his adhan to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's being in Medina Munawwara. So apparently there is a hadith about that, but he says that the first adhan that he gave after being in Medina Munawwara was here in Jerusalem. It was time for Dhuhr prayer following the conquest of the city. So this was with Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, and Umar radiallahu anhu then requested Bilal radiallahu anhu to give the adhan here. Then others that you have who visited here are of course Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu, who died in 21 Hijri, and Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, Abu Sufyan's son Yazid, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu's brother, he died in 18th Hijri. He also came here. Then of course Muawiyah radiallahu anhu ibn Abi Sufyan, who died in 60 Hijri, much later, he received his bay'ah for Khilafah here. Because he was in Sham, he was the governor of Damascus anyway. So he received his bay'ah here. Then you have some of the other greatest ones, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, he came here and he entered into ihram from here, and then he went to Makkah Mukarramah. Others came, there's many others that came with an intention to perform Hajj. They started with a visit to Jerusalem, ihram, and then they went to Makkah. And they did this of course because of the hadith that's related by Imam Abu Dawud: he who begins his Hajj or Umrah from the Aqsa mosque to the Makkah mosque will be forgiven his previous sins. So Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu then came to Jerusalem and started his Umrah here. He is said to he is said to have come into Jerusalem for the Fajr prayer, and then he sat in the masjid for a while, and then when the sun rose, Ishraq time, then he rose to pray together with his companions. So they prayed Ishraq, and then after that they went on to their animals, their mounts, and then they set off. MashaAllah. That's why I said that I have a classmate from Preston who comes here twice a year, and in one of them he goes for Umrah from here, and they put their ihram on and they labbaik Allahumma labbaik through the whole city. MashaAllah. Abdullah ibn Abbas also radiallahu anhu also visited Jerusalem. He also started his pilgrimage to Makkah from here, and it was in winter. Then Safiya bint Huyay radiallahu anha, she was the wife who became Muslim after being the leader of the Jewish, after being the daughter of the Jewish leader Huyay, and she was the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She is also said to have come to Jerusalem, and I believe it was Mount Olives that she climbed upon, and then it's reported that she said, from here people will part company from one another on the Day of Judgment, and will either go to Jannat or Jahannam. So she stood on that Mount Olives, and this is what she said. Another great Sahabi to have come here was Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiallahu anhu, and Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Now we're taking the names of some of the greatest of the Sahaba here. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, Sa'd ibn Abi Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, Bilal ibn Abi Rabah. Abdullah ibn Salam also, he came here. He was the Jewish rabbi who had become Muslim. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he also came here. Ubadah ibn Samit not only came here and stayed here, he passed away here. So his grave is there behind that golden gate in Babur Rahmah. And also Shaddad ibn Aus radiallahu anhu and Tamim ad-Dari, they all came here. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari stayed in Jerusalem for some time doing ibadah here. Another famous one, Mu'adh ibn Jabal al-Ansari. He came to Jerusalem and he spent here 3 days in fasting and in salat. And on his departure, he turned to his companions and he said, as for your previous sins, you have been forgiven. Reflect now on what you will do for the remaining part of your life. So clearly they all came here for a reason. And clearly there's a reason why the Muslims here have, mashallah, the strength that they do to keep the place and enliven the place and preserve the place. A number of Sahaba are buried here now. Because they came here, of course they passed away here. One is Ubadah ibn Samit radiallahu anhu, which I mentioned. He was a great dignitary and a witness to the first and second pacts of Aqaba. He was also present in the battle of Badr and all the other battles of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu appointed him as the Qadi and the preacher of the Sham, of the greater Levant, greater Syria, and he was also then made a Qadi of Palestine and then of Jerusalem in particular. He died in Ramallah, but he was buried in Jerusalem in that graveyard that I mentioned. Shaddad ibn Aus al-Ansari's grave is also there, and others who are reported to be buried here are Wathila ibn al-Asqa radiyallahu anhu, maybe slightly less known to some of you, but he is generally mentioned in the hadith and so on. He died in 83 Hijri. And Dhul Isba' at-Tamimi, very unknown. And the Yemeni prince of Persian origin, who knows who that is? Fayruz ad-Daylami radiyallahu an. He died in 53 Hijri. So you've got a few Sahaba that are buried here as well. Now beyond that, there's a huge list, and I don't want to make it boring for you because it's just a big list, but I'll mention some of the very prominent one and tell you something about them, which tells you who they are, and when you understand who they are, then you understand the things that they do and what the significance is of those things. So first and foremost, if you look at the Tabi'een, after the Sahaba, the famous jurist and faqih, Abdur-Rahman al-Awza'i, who died in 157, he says that Qubaysa ibn Dhu'ayb, who died in 86 Hijri, and Abdullah ibn al-Muhayriz, another famous one, who died in around 100 Hijri, and Hani ibn Kulthum, again 100 Hijri, would occasionally come from Ramallah to Jerusalem for the performance of ritual prayers. So they stayed in Ramallah, but they would come here. Jerusalem was also visited by somebody named Muharib ibn Dithar, rahimahullah. He died in 116. He was the jurist and the judge of Kufa. Famous name, Muharib ibn Dithar. Another one was Muhammad ibn Wasi' from Basra, who died in 127. Then we visited this maqam yesterday, Rabi'a al-Basriya, al-Adawiyya. Al-Adawiyya is her family name, and Basriya is because she's from Basra. She is one of the most famous of the women ascetics. Her story is very interesting. There's a lot of controversy about her story. And so I'm just going to mention a few parts that are known. According to Ibn Khallikan, Ibn Khallikan is a famous historian. He says that she's been one of the most distinguished figures of her time. She came from a very poor family when she grew up, and her father died. Her father passed away. She was still in her youth when her father passed away. And a drought struck Basra. There was a drought in Basra, and Rabi'a, rahimahullah, with her three sisters, they had to leave their home and they wandered around aimlessly looking for something. She was captured by a man. Now in those days, people would capture people and make them into slaves. Alhamdulillah, we don't have it in the same way today, but he made her into a slave and sold her to another man. This other person overburdened her with work. He used to just give her lots and lots of work to do. Now what is she going to do, you know? However, Al-Attar, he gives the following account of how Rabi' al-Basriya's spiritual message, how she became really righteous and pious. One day when she saw a man casting evil looks at her, she fled along the road to Syria. Now, if you understand that Jerusalem is in the greater part of Sham, when you say Syria, you mean Sham in general, I mean here. In the land, the precincts of which we have blessed. Barakna hawlaha. So on this road, when she fled, she had this ilham, you can say. She had an ilham, a silent communication in a sense. And she asked Allah, are you pleased with me? Now this is what's reported. Are you pleased with me? So then she heard a voice saying, don't be grieved, for on the day of judgment, the favored people in Jannah will look upon you and envy you. They will look upon you and mashallah, they will envy you. She came back to her master's home, and after that she spent the nights in prayer. When her master saw how pious she was, he set her free. Then she just completely dedicated herself to worship and devotion, spending her entire life in continuous worship. That's why she became so famous. She made her way to Jerusalem then, where they say she spent the rest of her life, and this is where she died. Her grave is supposed to be outside of Jerusalem at the top of the Mount Olives Mountain, well known. That's why Shihab ad-Din al-Maqdisi, he says that people visit the grave in his time. According to another author, her grave is on the peak of Mount Olives to the east of Jerusalem. I'm just explaining this so you understand other significance. We've already visited it, or at least outside it. Near the place from where Isa alayhi salam ascended to the heavens. It is to the south, in a cloister to which people come down by means of a staircase. So it looks like people knew about this from before. And of course these things might have changed a bit in terms of how you get there and so on. It says that when she was about to die, a large number of pious people came around, were around her. And then she said, get up and go, leave. All of you leave. Leave the road open to the messengers of Almighty Allah, meaning the angels. Leave the road open for the angels. They all left and they shut the door. Then they heard the voice of Rabi'ah reciting the Shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. And after she had breathed her last, these devout people gathered again around her. They bathed her and did the funeral prayer on her. And then they interned her into her final abode. Similar with Hassan al-Basri, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, it says that he told his wife to leave, and then he suddenly started saying, what are all these faces around me? These are faces of people I don't recognize. And then he told everybody to go out, and then after that he died very peacefully. And then it mentions, actually Ibn al-Jawzi mentions this. I had heard this in a lecture before from somewhere. When they buried him and they put the soil on him and covered the grave, I heard this in a lecture once. A piece of paper fluttered down like this and rested on the grave, and when they looked at it, it said, Bara'atum min Allah li Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. There's exoneration and freedom from Allah for Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Now, I'd heard that and it impacted me a lot, but I didn't want to relate it to anybody because I didn't know the source. But then Ibn al-Jawzi has mentioned this. Ibn al-Jawzi, the great Hanbali scholar of Baghdad, an amazing scholar, one of my favorite scholars of Baghdad. He's very particular about what he relates. So he relates this point that yes, there was this paper that was seen after his death, and this is what was said about it. So these are basharat. This is what you call basharat. One of the reasons for these basharat, these glad tidings, you know, when people die and then somebody sees them in a dream, some people may take this lightly and dismiss it and say, oh, this is just all made up. I mean, you can't deny somebody's experience. If you've had a dream, I don't need to believe you, but I can't deny that you've had the dream. Because dreams are an absolute possibility. If you can see evil in your dream, you can see good in your dream. And if you see good about somebody, alhamdulillah, but you can't go with your dream and start imposing it on people. But you can, mashallah, feel good about it. And there will be mubashirat, there will be glad tidings that are given for people. This is the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another person that I want to speak about that came here was Ibrahim ibn Adham. Another great, one of the accepted zuhad and zahideen of the past, ascetics of the past. He died in 162 Hijri. He was amazing. You know where he came from? He came from Balkh. Balkh today is in Afghanistan, right? In the Persian speaking area, it's about 3 hours away from Tirmidh. And Tirmidh today is in Uzbekistan. So this is Balkh, close to Uzbekistan. It's Khurasan area in general, or Mawara al-Nahr, just in the border of that. He came from Balkh and he was of royal lineage. He was of a royal family, and he was enjoying life as a royal person would do, as a prince, you know, enjoying life with all the money at your disposal to do whatever you want. Once he went out hunting. Hunting is the pastime of the rich, hunting and golf and eagle, what do you call that? What do you call it? Bird hunting, as some of these people do. Right? These are expensive sports. So hunting. And he heard an invisible caller waking him out of his heedlessness. What is this ghaflat you're in? He heard something, he heard a voice. Allah sends message to different people through different ways. Some people Allah teaches them through an accident. Some people Allah teaches them through the death of a close loved one. Some people Allah teaches through a bayan, a dream, different ways. He was woken up by a voice that took him out of that, so he abandoned his way of life. Many of us get messages. Many of us get messages, but we don't listen to them. We ignore them. And then when we ignore them, they don't come enough. Unless Allah sends a powerful message. So this was a powerful message, and that's it, khalas. After that, he became one of the most pious people. So today, he is one of the most accepted Sufis of the early times, 162 Hijri. In fact, they call him a Zahid. This is before Sufism was developed. Even, he's like one of the masters, of the early masters. He abandoned everything, and then he made his way to Mecca, accompanied by Sufyan al-Thawri and Fudayl ibn Iyad. Sufyan al-Thawri was a great muhaddith, but Fudayl ibn Iyad also had a strange beginning. He was a highway robber, and he was so dangerous that people would be frightened to go through his area because khalas, there would be problems. He would a highwayman. However, he was infatuated with a woman. This is a long story, but he was infatuated with a woman, and one day he hears a verse, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَمَا نَزَلَ مِنَ الْحَقِّ وَلَا يَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِ فَطَالَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْأَمَدُ. Hasn't the time come for the people who have belief, like many of us have belief, but their hearts are not there yet? The gist of the verse. And he just walked out of it, and then he became known as Abid al-Haramain, the worshipper and the devotee of the two harams. That's how much he began to worship. That's how much he went to the Haramain, and he worshipped so much that his title was, but he's just a worshipper in the two harams, Abid al-Haramain. So he ended up in Jerusalem, where he slept habitually besides the rock. The rock holds a lot of significance for a lot of people, it seems, because that was the first building that was made here even before this masjid, the rock. So, I mean, the masjid was started, but that was the main building that was made in that way, in that large way. Maybe to outshine the temples or whatever the case is, it's so big. Because if you only had the church and then you had this big structure in this beautiful octagonal way, the Qubbat al-Sakhra. Anyway, one day while he was leaving the city, this is a very interesting story. While he was leaving the city one day, he passed by a group of armed troops. I'm sure you know how that feels now, right? He passed by armed troops. They asked him, what is the question they asked him? Not are you Muslim? Right? Not are you Muslim? They asked him, are you a slave? Because in those days, worried about slaves running away. They had slaves, unfortunately, right? So, are you a slave? He answered, yes. Free man, yes. He was a prince. He says, are you a slave? He said, yes, I'm a slave. And then they said, a runaway slave. So he said, yes. So they grabbed him and put him in prison. When the people in Jerusalem found out about this, they all went together to the governor of Tiberias to ask for his release. The governor summoned him and asked him, why were you imprisoned? So he said, I don't know, ask the armed troops. They imprisoned me, so ask them. So he replied, they in turn said, you're a runaway slave, that's why he imprisoned you. He said, true, that is very true. I am running away from my sins. So then he was released. Another person that came was Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah, who died in 161 Hijri. He was well known for hadith. Haddathana Sufyan, you hear that in the hadith books often. He was also known for his piety and his asceticism. He came to the Aqsa masjid, we offered his salat, and then he went to the Qubbat al-Sakhra and he finished an entire Quran there. Walid ibn Muslim, he recounts how he met Sufyan al-Thawri in the masjid in Jerusalem, and he asked Sufyan whether he had visited the Dome of the Rock, and Sufyan said, yes, I've visited and I've read the entire Quran there. So I think they used to do probably less tourism and more coming here and just focus. Layth ibn Sa'd. You've heard of Layth ibn Sa'd, another great muhaddith. He was one of the most, in fact, he's called the Alim of Egypt. Awza'i that I mentioned earlier, he was the Alim of Syria. These were the few individual tabi'een who were known to be the biggest scholars of their area. So for Sham, it was Awza'i. Layth ibn Sa'd was the scholar, he's the Alim of Misr, of Egypt. He was a contemporary of Imam Malik. He died in 175 Hijri, Imam Malik died in 179 Hijri. So they were contemporaries. And he was said that he was so open-handed that no year of his life ever passed without him being in debt. He went to Jerusalem, came to Jerusalem during his stay there. Khalif al-Mansur visited the city. And upon meeting him, he said to him, I admire your strength of mind, and I thank Allah who has created people like you among my subjects. I am honored to have you among my subjects. Just as something last year when we visited Senegal. So there's a big Shaykh there who was always poor because he used to look after so many poor people. They used to receive so much money, but it's receiving the money and then giving it to the poor, all the people under there. You know, like you've seen here now how many poor people there are. In England, we don't understand this, but there's a lot of people here who will receive a lot of imams and who will receive a lot of money and then they just pass it on. They never have enough money for themselves. They're just passing it through. However, one year, this Shaykh Ibrahim Niyas, his name was, rahimahullah, he took some money and he put it aside. And they said, what are you doing? He said, I want to pay zakat this year. I've never done amal on zakat. I've never practiced the zakat. So this year I'm going to leave some money aside, so I'll have a nisab, so I can pay zakat this year. That is how they used to pay zakat. And we're trying to get out of zakat. You know, finding loopholes and things of that nature. They said what some people do is, I don't want to say who, but this was a Memon who told me this about somebody. Anyway, he said, very wealthy. Now you know when you pay zakat at the end of the year, only after a year has passed. So the day before, he takes all of his money and he goes to his wife and he says, you've been a very good wife all year. This is all hadiyah for you. So the next day on his zakat, they had no money. The next year, when it's 1 year for her, she comes to her husband, you've been a very good husband, but I'm going to keep all the money. I don't know if this is true or not, but this was making fun of it. Now the thing is that although technically they're treating this as a loophole, but it's clearly wrong. And at the end of the day, we pay our zakat because it's to purify our wealth. Zakat is to purify yourself and your wealth. If you try to do these loopholes, the dirt is still going to be in your wealth. There's a hadith in Muslim which says that zakat is the wasikhu amwalin nas. It's the dirt of the wealth of people. Now you understand the wisdom of why the family of Rasulullah SAW cannot accept zakat. That's why you can't give zakat to masjids. You don't want to use the dirt of your wealth. Because when we earn our living, we don't know where our money is coming from, 100% halal. You know, the person who's giving it to us, he may have got it from haram, or maybe above that is haram. And today, the whole industry is riba based. So our wealth, we don't know anything. So this is to 2.5%, clean it out, clean it out, clean it out. That's why Allah give us the tawfiq to quickly remove the zakat amount. Otherwise it pollutes the rest, it says. It pollutes the rest. If you keep zakat you don't pay zakat, that dirt, it spreads and it pollutes everything else. So people who give zakat properly, they get more barakah, even if they appear to have less. Then another great person was Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. He died in 150 Hijri, another tabi and also a famous scholar and muhaddith. He visited Jerusalem and he prayed here. He sat at the southern door of the rock where many people thronged around him, writing and listening to what he had said. You know, outside there's how many? 30 something platforms. These cement platforms, if you see them on your way, they're places where people used to teach. Right? That's, you know, like here you've got number of durus going on. So likewise outside there were 30. Imam Ghazali found that to be less. He counted, he said 30, 32, that's too less. What's happened to people? 30 different classes going on. It's ajib. You've also noticed another thing. Have you seen how people just stand up whenever they want and they give a bayan? Even before Jummah, some just random guy will stand up and tell people what he thinks. Like a few ayat, a story or whatever the case is. This is very traditional. I've understood a lot after seeing this, because in the books it mentions that so-and-so was a wa'idh, a preacher. He used to give these stories in such and such a mosque. And I would wonder about this, because in England it's a very specific kind of system we have, right? So here you can see how, mashallah, everything kind of goes and it works. We're used to Medina Munawwara, Makkah Mukarramah is tight control over everything. and England were very tight control as well, right? But here you just see, mashallah, anybody comes and says, and sometimes somebody benefits from these things, from each person. If we move further down, then we have Dhunnun al-Misri. This is Dhunnun, the famous Sufi of Misr, of Egypt. He died in 245 Hijri. He was of Nubian descent. Nubian descent in Egypt means you're from the darker people, African tribe there. He traveled from Egypt to Mecca and then to Syria on his way to Jerusalem. Imam Ghazali quotes him as saying, somewhere on the eastern coast, I met a woman and I asked her, where do you come from? She said, I come from the people whose backs forsake their beds. Where are you going now? I asked. To men who are distracted from glorifying Allah, neither by business nor by sale. رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِيهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ. Then when he came to Jerusalem, he is quoted as saying, on the rock of Jerusalem, I found the sinner estranged, the one obedient to God exhilarated, and the frightened fleeing, the hopeful entreating Allah, and the contented rich, and the lower people submissive. So you saw many barakat here. I think we'll stop here because there's a adhan in a few minutes. If anybody has any questions about anything.